Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's installment of the Trenchless Technology webinar series. My name is Mike Kesdy. I'm the managing editor of Trenchless Technology and Trenchless Technology Canada magazines, and I'm pleased to moderate today's webcast, Finding Success with Pipeline Rehabilitation. We're going to take a quick poll, so please submit your answer and then click the blue Return to Presentation button. I would like to take this time to remind everyone that any views or opinions presented in this webinar are solely those of the presenters and do not necessarily represent those of Benjamin Media Inc., nor does Benjamin Media Inc. endorse any products or methods presented. On behalf of the team at Trenchless Technology, I'd like to thank everyone for taking part in today's webcast. Unlike our typical Trenchless Technology webinars, this webcast is a live panel discussion with system owners focused on successes and challenges with pipe relining projects. Joining us today are John J. Struzziery, Director of Wastewater Operations and Assistant Director of Public Works for Hull, Massachusetts, Fred Wu, Senior Civil Engineer, Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago's Engineering Department, and Caroline Barlow, Interim CMOM and Rehab Program Manager for Seattle Public Utilities. We want this to be an interactive panel discussion, so we encourage you to participate by typing your questions into the designated panel in the left-hand portion of your screen. Without further ado, we will get rolling. I guess to start things off, we'll go to Caroline first. Can you briefly describe your water and sewer system, its condition? Kind of give us some information about what makes your system unique in the way that it operates?
Yes, so with Seattle Public Utilities, we serve about 1.5 million customers, and we maintain about 1,400 miles of sewer pipe that are both combined, solely sanitary, and drainage lines as well. And we have experienced our system aging. Our average age of our system is about 80 years old, and majority of our pipe is VCP or vitrified clay pipe. We also have a good amount of concrete pipe as well.
Great, thanks. John, same question for you. Can you set things up, let everybody know what makes your system unique, special?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hull, Massachusetts is a coastal community. It's surrounded by water. It's a long, narrow peninsula, the Atlantic Ocean on one side and a bay on the other. We have 42 miles of pipeline, with parts of our system dating back to the 1860s, which is quite remarkable. And some of those sewers are in quite great shape. But most of the system was built in the 70s and 80s. We have a 3 MGD wastewater plant that's currently averaging about 1.5 MGD. And it's been staying that way for a number of years, and we expect it to stay that way. But it does allow us to take some capacity from our neighboring towns as well. But most except for a handful of our residents and properties are tied into our system. There's probably 6 to 7 properties that are not tied into the system. So dealing with, but being on a coastal community, tidal fluctuations is probably one of our largest concerns, that in heavy rain events, because that's when we see significant rainfall-induced and tidal-induced infiltration and inflow coming into our system. And just dealing with those during those high-flow events is a significant challenge. The other challenge is, since our system is dated for so old, much of the older sewers are small diameters, like 6-inch, maybe a few 8-inch, but most of it is 6-inch clay pipes. And that creates a challenge for cleaning the pipes and coming up with relining methods to deal with that. Our largest pipes are 30 and 36-inch. That's part of our 4-mile interceptor. It was a reinforced concrete pipe, and over the last number of years, we've had 3 phases of rehabilitation using a replace pipeline to completely reline the entire length of the interceptor. And the biggest project was just done about 2 years ago. And that was a huge undertaking, and we'll get into some aspects of that through some of the other questions that we have. So we also have 7 pump stations, and 2 other unique features is a 4-barrel siphon that we have that of the interceptor that was designed in order to cross under a large drainage culvert that because of grade changes, it needed to stay above our sewer. And a 2-barrel, we call it depressed sewer, that's always underwater. It goes under a channel that services that's tidal fluctuated to go in and out of the bay. So that's been a challenge also, just to be able to get in, clean that, and reline that one as well.
Great, thanks. And Fred, lastly, can you tell us a little bit about Chicago's system?
Sure. So good afternoon, everybody. I work for the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. I'm just going to refer to us as MWRD. That's a lot of words. We service 800 and we'll just round up 884 square miles, all located within the boundaries of Cook County, Illinois. We service 125 suburban communities, along with the city of Chicago. The district, or MWRD, serves an equivalent population of 10.35 million people. Or if we want to talk about real people, it's like 5.25 million real people. The MWRD owns and operates 7 wastewater treatment plants and treats on average between the 7 wastewater treatment plants 1.3 billion gallons a day, give or take rain, with a treatment capacity of 2 billion gallons a day. 2 billion gallons a day. So I said billion, not million. I know a lot of people are used to hearing the word million. Along with that, the MWRD owns and operates approximately 560 miles of intercepting sewers, which are both combined and sanitary and force mains, ranging in size from 8 inches in diameter to 27 feet in diameter. And they're fed by approximately 10,000 local sewer connections. A couple of unique things about our system. Obviously, we're located in a highly urbanized area. So, dealing with other municipalities and high rises are issues. We have a lot of shapes similar to the other panelists. Like, our system's relatively old too, over 100 years old, some of the sewers. So we have shapes like egg, round, elliptical, horseshoe, teardrop, reverse teardrop, circular, box culvert, you name it. We probably have it in the ground. And most of our intercepting sewers are relatively deep. So we don't actually own the local sewers. We intercept the local sewers and convey those to our wastewater treatment plants. And since the majority of our system runs via gravity, we unfortunately have very deep sewers that we need to take care of.
Great, thanks. This webcast focuses on pipeline lining, which helps solve issues with this underground aging infrastructure. So what are the main problems facing your system? Fred, we'll stick with you. What kind of maintenance, repair problems? Do you have a lot of I&I, root intrusion? Just let us know kind of what's going on in that realm.
So like I mentioned before, our system's relatively deep, so root intrusion is typically not the issue. And our sewers are kind of big, so we have higher flow rates. So the problems we really see are spalling, exposed rebars, like utilities kind of like putting their utilities through our sewers. We've seen that a couple times. H2S damage, exposed aggregate, kind of more along the structural end if you were to look at a NASCO rating things, but we do see things like mineral deposits and stuff like that.
All right, and Caroline, what kind of issues are you seeing with your system?
Definitely with age, we're seeing the structural defects more and more. We also are experiencing more roots. We're pretty green in the evergreen state. So that is something that we are having to maintain, working with our O&M folks to have a routine preventive maintenance schedule that also puts our pipes at risk of damage with cutting materials. And when we see liners intruding from side sewers that can also create issues within our system. I would say also fog is a component. It's not one of the major components, but we do see fog within our system and having to maintain and work around that.
Great, thanks. And John, what are you guys seeing in your neck of the woods?
Okay, I've been in this position for about 5 years, over 5 years. And when I came on, we only had 2 small phases of the interceptor that had already been relined, and the pipe was getting severely deteriorated. We had exposed aggregate, exposed reinforcing steel, and it was just the highest priority that we needed to address. So we were able to secure the funding, get the bids, and we relined the remaining sections of that interceptor. So that was a major undertaking. In addition to that, we included all the manholes. We put an epoxy lining for all the manholes. And one of the biggest challenges for that whole project was cleaning the pipeline, because it hadn't been cleaned in over 40 years. And that was a huge undertaking, needed significant planning. If you can imagine the types of equipment that would be needed for vacuum jet vacs and bypass pumping in some cases for that operation. So that was significant. We do have root intrusion in many of the smaller sewers that may go cross country. There's not a lot of that, but we have been using root treatment for that. And wipes and rags, I think we all share that problem, and that's that we're not. That's not uncommon to us. We're always dealing with that. We have public awareness programs, just try to get the word out. But that's a major issue in our pump stations and throughout the collection system.
Great. Well, we have you on there, John. What specific relining methods does Hull use, and kind of which ones work best for your system?
Okay, for the interceptor and any of the collection system that we've completed lining already, we've used secured in place lining systems, and that's been quite effective for us. And we did evaluate other systems such as slip lining, fold and form, or other spiral wound in place systems. But secured in place were the only ones that bid on the project. The projects, and my prior background was consulting engineer, so I've had significant experience using other systems such as that, and swage lining, directional drilling, for new pipe installations, and tunneling as well. So I promoted the engineers, our consultants, to look at other systems as well, just to make sure that we had included all systems and would be specifying the most appropriate ones.
What about you, Carolyn? What are you guys using in Seattle?
So historically, we've used steam cure or water cured CIPP liners, or referenced as thermal cure liners. We have transitioned to utilizing ultraviolet curing methods, so the UV CIPP liners. We mainly made that transition because of some of the nuisance odors associated with the steam curing, and some claims we experienced on private property associated with that steam emission. So holistically, we've made a move towards UV, where we don't necessarily experience the UV. There is a higher cost point that we've experienced around it, but we have definitely seen a higher strength around those liners. We do occasionally still use steam when there's certain constructability issues that don't allow for the UV installation. We have an in-house crew that also utilizes the ambient cure liners, and that is mainly for point repair. So we're installing sectional liners or T-liners at lateral connections. And that's been pretty successful for our team. There's basically, once you mix the resin, there's a point where the material hardens. So you have about, an hour or two to install that liner once that resin has been applied. So it's a pretty quick process, but it's been something that's been really useful for our in-house crews. We have looked at other technologies from a relining method. We have used fold and form in the past, but we had issues around high heat temperatures entering in those pipes and those folding back on themselves. So it's something that we prefer not to use, but we have used that in the past. We also are exploring the use of spiral wound lining, and then also the spun cast or centrifugal cast concrete material. So we are looking at piloting projects like that in the future.
Right. Fred, what are, you mentioned that the sewers are fairly deep, so maybe you aren't using CIPP, or maybe you are. What is your preferred relining method?
So I'll say that we don't really have a preferred relining method. Each situation we need to analyze each situation independently. But to date, the districts used, or the MWRDs used cured in place pipe. We've used steam, water, and UV cure for just our normal intercepting lines. We've noticed that UV has a limitation on size, and we have interceptors that get up to 27 feet in diameter. Our average size of our interceptors is probably like between 48 and 54 inches. So kind of pushing the threshold of UV. We've used ambient cures on our external drop pipes. Those have been pretty successful. Due to the large diameter of our sewers, we've used slip lining, channel lining, spiral wound pipe, link pipe, centrifugally cast geopolymer, centrifugally cast shotcrete, epoxy lining, urethane lining. I think we've used composite fiber reinforced also. I think we've pretty much used everything on the market to date. So again, I think maybe the MWRD situation's a little more unique. When we run into these problems, our sewers are relatively large, so there's not a lot of other agencies that kind of have to kind of go through the process of trying to vet out products, to fix I think we recently fixed a 10-foot diameter sewer. So there's not a lot of other agencies that have 10-foot diameter sewers that are necessarily in the same situation as the MWRD. So unfortunately, there's no one size fits all.
Hey, Mike, could I add something too?
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
In addition, I don't know if I recall hearing it from Fred or Caroline, but we also used pipe bursting for replacing a force main. We had a 3,800-foot force main along the ocean bluff for the most part, and it was difficult to access. And pipe bursting was a good opportunity in order to replace that deteriorated and corroded ductile iron force main. So that was a technique. We used a high-density polyethylene pipe, and it just gave us another method in the toolbox in order to get that part of it done. And fortunately, there was an old railroad bed along that bluff, and so it provided the access where we could get intermediate access to dig the entry and exit pits and be able to have like 1,000-foot lengths in order to do that pipe burst. So it's just another technique that's maybe not that common in many areas, but just wanted to mention it.
Hey, yeah, thanks for stepping in, John, with that additional information. Again, I'd like to encourage all of today's webcast attendees to ask questions in the question panel for the audience, and we'll get them answered for you. Moving along, what have been some of the experiences and lessons learned with your relining? Fred, we'll start with you on that one.
Oh, sorry, have to unmute myself. Some of the lessons learned, kind of alluded to this earlier. Each job or each line, you kind of need to analyze independently. Also, another thing is the district undertook the task of doing a condition assessment program for our system. So that's something that we would kind of advise that any other agency or someone else to get a better grasp of, if you need point repairs or if you need to do like a system-wide, if you need to do like an entire trunk line to be repaired at the same time. So there is some economies of scales if you do an entire trunk line at the same time.
John, what about you in Massachusetts?
And what I'll say here is it doesn't just apply to us, it applies to anyone doing any type of pipe rehabilitation. Understand what the problem is first. I've heard way too often many people just say, oh, we'll just line this pipe. Well, I say, what's the problem? Why do we have to line it? So understand what the problem is, why it's in the condition it's in, why it's in the state that it's in, is important before you select any one method. And I think by understanding the problem, then you can best find a way to correct it. The other thing is understand what you're dealing with. Once you say you're going to deal with a system such as pipe cleaning, as I said, that's going to be a significant undertaking. I can just tell from Carolyn and Fred that also has to be an issue with them. Maybe not so much Fred if he's got good movement in his pipelines, but in our case, we have long, flat sewers, and it just being right along the beach, it has a tendency to collect a lot of debris along the way. So that was a major undertaking, and having the proper planning in order to undertake these types of projects is important. And really thinking through all aspects and dealing with your consultant or your in-house staff or the contract and the contractor to come up with a plan that's going to address all facets, think through all facets of what's involved in the work. I think that's all important to make a successful project.
Great. And Carolyn, I will go with you now.
Yeah, I think one of the really important things that we've learned is just the importance of locating the lateral connections. That has been probably one of the easiest things to miss, but is most costly if we don't reinstate those laterals, because that can cause a backup from a claim perspective that can impact a customer, from a regulatory impact. It could basically affect our consent decree that we have in place, and really just in the end result, the time to identify where those laterals are and reinstate those is very important. So one thing that we've really encouraged is to have that be a key element within our specifications, that the contractor is going through and reinstating and identifying those laterals. I think especially with UV, those products don't tend to dimple as well as the more traditional steam cured liner felt liners. With the fiberglass, you don't see as much flex. And so that has been something that more recently we've had to make some modifications around. Other things that are really important to us is the actual constructability. So setting up bypass and odor control if needed, and really making sure that it's very clear in our specifications and how we manage that with our contractors.
Great, thanks. Here's a question that came up. Everybody's talked about using CIPP and other realigning methods. Do any of you have experience, or do you guys grout prior to lining in high I&I areas within the pipe? Carolyn, I'll let you go first with this one.
Historically, we haven't. We've had one or two that I can count since my time, but I've only really been with the utility about 5 years. I think that the challenge is that grout for I&I purposes, or is it for a structural component, right? And so those are things that we're actually looking into currently on our current design packages. We have used the hydrophilic gel to minimize I&I, and have seen that to be successful. And so, is there an opportunity where we're concerned about the pressures created by, a gusher or some other flow into the pipe that we can mitigate with that type of injection or grout. I think one of the things we're exploring is whether or not if we see a hole and we're concerned about dimpling into the hole, is that something that we'd want to fill to help minimize maybe voiding at the surface in advance? And so we're currently evaluating that on current projects, but we have not executed on from our standpoint.
What about you, John? Do you guys have experience with grouting in your system?
As part of our last round of rehabilitation, we did curtain grout all of our manholes prior to lining, and we found significant leaks anyway around our manholes, and as well as at the interface between the pipe and the manhole. So each of those areas and all those manholes were pre-grouted in advance of the liner. We had another area where there was a hole in a 12-inch diameter pipe that was right along the ocean, and how long it had been there, who knows, and who knows what was happening during tidal changes and high flow events. So that in that particular case, we put a sectional liner in and grouted behind that as well, just to fill the void behind the pipe, and then we put a full section, full length liner, manhole to manhole in that reach. And then there was another case where there was a collector sewer under significant groundwater pressure, and in order to control that, we used a pre-liner in order to help control that water before putting in a full-length liner. So it does, depending on the situation, depends on what you may need, but typically we have not used grouting as part of mainline piping.
Thanks. Fred, what is, if any, Chicago's experience?
So I will say in the past, we put the onus on the contractor to kind of determine the scope of the infiltration control required and the grouting required. But we've gotten a lot of feedback from contractors. You know, it's really hard to determine based on pre-videotaping as to like the quantity of grouting required. So we've actually gone through the effort of including unit price items within all of our lining contracts to address infiltration control and actually like, I guess, filling in voids or holes with concrete. So it's fair to the contractor and it's fair to the district or the MWRD. So we're able to basically, you know, it's still up to the contractor's best means and methods to determine what needs to be, what infiltration control needs to occur, but at least they're compensated for in an appropriate manner based on how much they actually pump. And if the district feels uncomfortable with certain areas, be like, hey, even though you guys think that this is the infiltration sufficiently, you know, controlled, we don't feel comfortable with that situation. So we can still compensate them in a reasonable manner according to the contract document. So that's a kind of a more recent action we've taken to kind of address that issue that's arisen over the past, I don't know, 5 years or so.
Great.
Hey, Mike, I have
Yep,
one thing to add. So one thing that was of consideration was for the gel grouting in environmentally sensitive areas. So if we're crossing under a creek, there are concerns about, you know, could that gel migrate to, you know, more of a environmentally sensitive area. So that's something to take in consideration if that's something folks are looking into with utilities crossing under, you know, wetlands or creeks. But I think there's concerns that, you know, it's going to travel and try to find the water. So something to be aware of if that is something you're considering.
Hey, thanks. One of the things that we hear here, you know, the Trenchless Technology magazine, when we're talking, you know, to folks about relining, is the importance of QA, QC on a project. So how do you manage and ensure your rehab installation meets your performance and quality expectations, both during the construction process as well as years down the line? Carolyn, we'll start with you.
I think definitely, you know, having it clearly identified in the specifications on as-builting and keeping track of the information of the installation, asking in advance for plans on how the installation process is going to work. I think there are challenges that we've had around more maybe when we do experience a defect, and how do we mitigate those issues. Sometimes the defects are minor and don't necessarily impact the function of the mainline, but it's a new product. We'd like to think of it as a new asset. Having this back and forth of, is this a defect that we can live with, or is there a bigger issue here that we need to explore? So that's been a challenge for us, is how do we manage the repair methods, right? And so that's something that has been a challenge that we've been trying to work through and try to address. And then really it's at the time when that we do experience a defect, having those discussions back and forth. I think a challenge we've had as well is the workmanship warranty, and being able to get out and CCTV the main lines again to within that year mark. And that's something that we've gone back and forth on. Do we go back and assess every asset that we installed? But with the amount of backlog that we're doing, we need to maybe focus it down to more of like a sampling of sites. And if we do see any defects, then we may bring that back to the warranty. I think a challenge for us is that because our system is so large, we in-house don't have the resources to do the CCTV. And then there's also a challenge of bringing back a contractor to the site once they've pretty much done substantial completion to reassess those assets. So, it's really just, how can we utilize this warranty that we have in place, and how do we make sure that we're capturing information so that we do have a quality product?
Fred, how about for the MWRD, how do you manage your QA, QC during and after the project?
That's a good question. So during the project, if we're talking about CIPP, most of our resident engineering staff is NASCO trained with, I think it's ITCP. I think that's the right acronym for the CIPP training. There's so many acronyms at NASCO. Most of the REs on staff are trained that are overseeing all the contracts. Also contained within all the contracts, we require third-party testing on all the materials installed. So we require either flat plate samples or in situ samples, and we go send those out for testing. If they don't check out, then we're asking the contractor to explain what happened, like what's their remedy, or whatever. So those are things that we use in advance. We try to lay out as much testing requirements in advance in the contract document, so the contractor's not basically shocked with what we're requiring. Specifically with new products, I know talking about just geopolymer in general, like that's a newer product on the market. We have a fair number of testing requirements for not necessarily geopolymer, but a newer product where we don't have that comfort level. So we want to make sure we're comfortable with what's being put in the ground. And then we want in situ testing to understand what's going on with the products. So that's kind of QA, QC on the job site. What we also require is, which contractors don't like at all, we require a 5-year maintenance bond on all of our contracts. So 5-year maintenance bond, so about 4 years after the contract is substantially complete. The group I work for also manages the CCTV for the entire MWRD. We schedule it to go out and go re-inspect all of the stuff that was fixed, whether it be manholes, sewers, you name it. And then if we notice any defect, we're then notifying the contractor. And if they're, we haven't run into this yet, but if they're unresponsive, we do have a bond that we could theoretically execute to have the issue repaired. But for the most part, I would say all the time so far, the contractors have been willing to cooperate with us and come back and fix any issues that we've discovered via CCTV 4 years later.
Okay, thanks. And John, what about in Holland? Maybe you have some other, experience with this based on your previous work history as well.
Sure. What we have done and what I've done in the past was make sure we have good qualifications and experience provisions right at the beginning in the planning and design phases. So your contract documents include number of years experience, number of projects, the size and shape, complexity, that type of thing that you were dealing with on this particular project. Having a good set of specifications, the performance base is also important. That outlines the design criteria, the testing protocol, the installation methods that need to be addressed, things like that. Once the liner shows up on, and then certainly the shop drawing process is important to make sure that each reach or pipe has been designed for the proper conditions, and that you know what the liner thickness would be along a length. This particularly is important when you have a long length pipe installation, so that you make sure that the right liner is going in, being installed in the right reach. And when it shows up on site, making sure that that's the right liner for that particular reach, and looking to make sure it's properly marked as such. Once the liner is installed, doing flap, or as the pipe is being installed, using flat plate or restrained samples. Restrained is always a difficult one to get, so we typically rely on the flat plate samples and look at those, the thickness and the consistency of the resin through those. But another sign that not often done, but I promote it in many cases, is to where the coupons are taken out for the service laterals. Check those, because that gives you a good indication along the length of the liner, what the thickness of the liner is, and what the resin quality and saturation is along the pipeline. So it gives us some good indications of that. Then what we've done in our last rehab project was we also instituted not the 5-year, but a 1-year post-warranty inspection. So that was for 10% of the liner installed, we would inspect, do that post-inspection. As I recall, I think that all checked out fine in the cases that we did do. And that worked out quite well, and I thought that was an effective approach of dealing with this. Our challenge now is, now that's been in service for almost 2 years, what's our frequency going to be, and going back and doing a follow-up inspection. I think based on what I've seen, 3 to 5 years will be important, at least initially, just to check to see what the solid depositions are like and how much cleaning will be necessary, but then also just check the quality of the line and make sure it's holding up as well.
Great. We've witnessed the trenchless space when it comes to relining, change and evolve over the years. Do any of your programs have budget set aside specifically for piloting new technologies? Carolyn, we'll go with you first on this one.
We don't have a budget specifically towards new technologies, but we have the flexibility to use the funds that we have available to choose what materials we want to pilot. So I won't necessarily say I'm planning on having a certain amount towards doing this pilot on spiral wound, but if there's a need, we can basically adjust our funding around that.
John, what about Hull? Do you have budget set aside for piloting new technologies?
No, I need budget for the projects. So, unfortunately, however, I am very aware of what's going on in the industry, and should something become available, I would look to have a demonstration project be performed and see if we could get experience that way. In my role as Assistant DPW Director, I've also found other applications for using other systems, such as underground grouting systems that we've used for somewhat different applications, such as for seawall, filling voids behind seawalls. So that's been a successful approach in 2 cases here, in small trial areas, but it just demonstrated that we are open to that, and and it has been successful. So, but generally, we don't have a budget sufficient enough to try different methods.
And Fred, what about for you guys?
We don't specifically have a budget for piloting new technologies, but I think similar to Caroline's statement, like, you know, our group is relatively small and we're relatively nimble. So we internally vet any new technology, and, you know, we always have contracts in development for rehabilitation always. So, you know, maybe if there's an opportunity, we might try to like put in as an alternative or something like that. But we tend to internally vet things, and we're able to internally vet things pretty quickly. So to kind of suss things out.
Right. Part of the focus of today's webcast is, you know, kind of discussing some of the challenges that everyone, you know, has faced with trenchless relining. So, Fred, what are some of the challenges that the MWRD has faced? You know, is it finding contractors, finding products, supply issues, budgets?
So I would say recently we're having some difficulty finding contractors to bid MWRD jobs. I understand contractors are busy these days, and I think we're ultimately having a problem, like kind of grasping on how much prices are really escalating by, because, you know, 1 week gas is, you know, $2 less than it is the next week. So, you know, how do you really account for that? And when you're estimating contracts, and specifically CIPP lining is tied to the cost of oil. So like, you know, when oil is raising by $30 a barrel, you know, it's not immediate, but it's like, you know, you're trying to do estimates for jobs coming out 2 months later. It's really difficult to understand that whole process, and like how the cost of a barrel of oil is really impacted, and how the contractor takes that into account in their bidding process.
John, how about what are some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, certainly the cost increases, particularly in the recent year, has been one of the biggest challenges that we have, because we have two major treatment plant upgrade projects that recently got underway, and one just it was bid today actually, and the prices are way higher than what we expected them to be. And even the other upgrade project is significantly higher. So that puts a crimp on other projects that we can do. And what's going to be affected are our collection system products, where we had other types of lining planned in those areas. So what I see happening is we'll be deferring those products. And unfortunately, the treatment plant will need to have is taken a higher priority over the collection system, since we've done the majority of the significant problems that we had in the collection system with the interceptor. When we do get back to the collection system, though, and what we've had so far today and experience today is that the smaller diameter clay sewers have been the challenge. We find contractors don't have the equipment to deal with the smaller pipes, both cleaning, inspecting, and lining those pipes. So that will probably continue to be a challenge. And then we also are looking to line the laterals from the collected sewers to the property line, which is our responsibility. Up to the property line is our responsibility. And that also was a challenge on one project, and because it was so significant in the number of transitions that were in the service lateral, we needed to go back and dig and replace those laterals. So that's what we're dealing with.
Thank you. Carolyn, in Seattle, what are you experiencing?
I would reiterate what Fred said around pricing and contractor availability. I think another component of the availability is, with our limited pool of contractors that are bidding, they have a little bit more control on the scheduling of when the work can actually happen, right? Because we're kind of stuck with our contracting mechanisms. We'd like to time our projects when they go to bid so that we can construct within a fiscal year that we have planned for funding. But we have come to see that once we get the qualified bidder, they basically say, well, we're already booked for the next year, so we need to push it out another year. And so that's been a challenge for us. And how do we work our specs accordingly so that we can get responsive bidders to do the work within the time that we plan on spending our money? Because the money that we're procuring is really setting the rates for our customers, right? And so how do we build some flexibility so that we can get it built and the money spent in the same amount of time frame? I think the other component is of those contractors, they're not local, and so we're seeing them coming from different state or having to travel pretty far, and we're paying for them to be here. And so how do we invest in our local community and get contractors locally that can support our utility? So we're looking at how do we right size our contract packages so that we can have the mix of a large scale contractor coming, and are there smaller opportunities where we can have more local contractors do these more one-off repairs?
I guess dovetailing nicely into some of these challenges that you've seen, what are 3 things that you wish you could see in trenchless relining? Question came in from the audience, so they don't specify if it's on the contracting end or the product end. So just kind of, what are 3 things you wish you could see? We'll stick with you, Carolyn.
Oh, I think one thing I would like to see is contractors that are willing to work through some more complex sites and not necessarily cherry picking. Like, these are ones that are in a roadway, they're easy to access, so we can go, we don't have to worry about walking in equipment or, this manhole's buried or it's paved over, so we don't have the equipment to do that. So how do these primes that focus on lining, partner up with maybe a local contractor that is able to do some of this more excavation work? That would be one thing I'd like to see. Another thing is the way that our utilities structured is that our transportation group and permitting groups are in different departments, and we don't necessarily, we're treated like any other developer in as far as permitting. So that's a challenge that we've had around sequencing and scheduling our projects, is having to go through the permitting. And it's not necessarily directly towards lining, but it's something that we are faced with as a challenge on our projects. And then I think the third, I'm sure there's some other things, but I would definitely say resourcing is a big issue right now for us. Being able to look at investing in in-house crews, making sure that we have the right staff to do that type of work. We want to look at expanding our in-house crew from doing point repairs to doing maintenance hold to maintenance hold, so we have more flexibility to do some urgent needs. But we're just constrained with our internal resourcing limitations to hire on staff to do that work.
And John, how about you? What are 3 things that you wish you can see in terms of trenchless relining?
I guess this question could be taken in a number of different ways. However, what I see is, I guess, based on my experience, it seems that pipeline cleaning could become more efficient. And I know there are a number of different types of cleaning systems, and some of these big recycling type systems, they seem like they're adaptable for the biggest systems, something like what Fred might see. But in a smaller system, that becomes, it's not really cost effective. And what I see is that the systems that are used just seem somewhat archaic in a way, and just trying to getting water access is significant, and many people don't realize how much water is needed when you get involved in pipeline cleaning. And then having a disposal site as far as where to dispose of it then becomes an issue. And then likewise, CCTV, the inspection equipment, that that technology is also changing. However, it just seems like it takes a long time in order to change equipment for different size pipes when you're doing a different type of pipelines. And it just seems like there's a lot of time lost in that type of operation. And then the other aspect that we see is just the availability of contractors. We're a community about 25 miles south of Boston, and there's only one way in and one way out, unless you come by boat. And that's difficult for getting contractors to come to our community. So having more openness and availability of contractors in the Northeast area would be nice to have.
Thanks. And Fred, in your neck of the woods, then, what are kind of three things that you wish you could see in the trenchless pipe relining, whether it be contractor specific or product specific?
I think John and Caroline hit on a couple issues that I would echo, but another thing I would kind of like to see is like a greater awareness of what trenchless is, and more specifically, like, trenchless doesn't mean that there's no trench. It just means there's less of a trench and open cut. So when you go in and try to explain this to people, who are like, but it's called trenchless. You're like, yeah, it just means there's less trenching required. So it's kind of a hard concept to like grasp for the general public sometimes. And that's one thing. I think John was alluding to CCTV equipment. I was just, in fact, in the field the other day with a contractor. And, they're a relatively large contractor, and is like, this camera on the CCTV, I think he had a crawler. He's like, I think it's like 480 or something. He's like, if I could put my iPhone down there, it would have better quality video than this CCTV camera. I'm like, he's like, how is it possible that an iPhone camera, I mean, an iPhone's like, $1,000. CCTV camera is like $250,000. How is the quality on the camera on the iPhone better than the quality on the camera of the CCTV crawler? So like, that's something I'd like to see. And then and I think Caroline kind of alluded to permitting. Like, we're a large wastewater industry. We still have problems getting permits to, repair our own assets. So something like, I think maybe not necessarily with contractors or with the industry as like whole, but maybe just like kind of going to that acceptance and awareness of like what's really happening, and kind of making everybody's life a little easier, hopefully.
Based on what you've seen in the field, looking into the future in 50 years, do you believe you're going to need to start rehabbing previously rehabilitated pipelines and structures? Well, we'll let you answer first.
That's an interesting question, because someone literally just asked me this in the office the other day. You're like, hey, we're lining these sewers, like, we design our stuff for a fully deteriorated 50-year lifespan. Like, what happens in 50 years? Does this need to be, like, how are we going to fix this? Because we keep on reducing the diameter. And I said, that's a good question, because, like, I don't think a lot of people are thinking about this specific question. And it's something that, we had to take into consideration, because, like, you can only improve the Manning's End so much to increase the flow capacity. So, like, I think where I work, we take a more conservative approach. Like, we assume everything's fully deteriorated. We have a very conservative design parameter. So, I would hope that it would last for more than 50 years based on the way we design things. So I think we should be good. But again, things are going to fail eventually. So it's like, it's an interesting bridge to cross. When we get there, it's like, how do we then fix what's been fixed already? Is that going to require open cut? I have no answers to that question, but it's a very intriguing question that someone, like a newer engineer in the group, was like asking me. And I was like, that's a good question. So,
Carolyn, I see you smiling and nodding. So I think it's your turn to answer this question.
I mean, we're doing the same thing as far as our assumptions. Fully deteriorated 50 years. I think we've heard some buzz that it may be shifting to 75 years, just based on some of the original liners that have been installed. But, really, this is, in the grand scheme of pipe, right? This is a newer technology that we really haven't seen a full case where it's been that 100-year, right? But yeah, I guess with the planning, as we're doing the long range planning, maybe that is an assumption that you need to consider is a percentage of those pipes are going to require a full replacement because of capacity issues, or, you know, are they spot repairs because of a certain defect or a lateral issue? And really, you just got to work that into maybe your more long-range planning. I don't have answers for you right now. You know, our current long-range planning is 40 years, so we're still good, but I think it is definitely something to pass on to your successors and continue to have that ongoing long-term vision with this type of work.
John, do you have any thoughts on this subject?
I have thought about, you know, all this, and when you say 50 years, even 75 years, in the big scheme of things, that's not a long time period, especially when you're talking about large infrastructures like we all have. I've worked in big cities like Boston, Springfield, Massachusetts, and some of the old sewers that we encountered there, the old brick sewers, most of them were in excellent condition. Even in our town, we have an 18 by 24 oval brick sewer dating back to the late 1800s. And that's one of the best pipes I have in the system. And so for some reason, those were done right. And I think we're doing it right today. However, I think technology will continue to change. And I think we'll see better and more improved systems as well, with different types of materials, stronger, thinner materials, different types of epoxies and resins. So hopefully that will all change for the better, and we'll be able to have other opportunities to deal with other, you know, if we have to go back and reline these systems or redo something with these systems, we'll have those types of systems available to us. And the other consideration, I think, taking a closer look at flows, that maybe the flow conditions that the pipes were originally designed in were way too conservative. So that might become something to look at to see if we can downsize and use other types of systems as well. So there are a number of different things that can be looked at, and hopefully we don't need to go back in our lifetimes to redo anything that we're doing now and go from there.
You know, we're coming up on the hour here, so I guess the last question to the panel would be, do you have one bit of advice you would give a municipality or utility looking to start, you know, a relining program, or maybe just getting into relining? John, we'll let you go first.
As I said before, I think understanding the problem is important, and then thinking through the project and understanding all aspects of the project are important. Thinking through the traffic management, the bypass pumping, the equipment staging areas, all those are important, and it demonstrates to the public that we take this seriously, and if it's implemented properly, then things go a lot smoother, and the public has a better sense that, okay, we know what we're doing, and they have the confidence in order to keep funding our projects as well. So, and I think that's been a success in our community because of good planning and good execution. And this disruption, no doubt about it. But in this case, since we have one main road, it was important in order to do significant planning, since all phases of the work would impact the public.
Great, thanks. Fred, what about you?
Thanks. I think I alluded to this a little earlier. As far as like a relining program, I think ideally it's beneficial for any utility or municipality to have some type of inspection program. So you get it, like what John was alluding to, you get a bigger picture of how your system's operating, the condition the system is as a whole, and then at that point in time you're able to prioritize lining for maybe more critical areas, and then you can maximize how you're spending your money at that point in time. And then on top of that, I would also recommend maybe the use of a NASCO, like a standardized. I think NASCO is the only standardized inspections, inspection kind of system. So it's somewhat objectively rated. So you're not having some CCTV inspector subjectively rate your sewer. So then each sewer is not really rated on the same scale.
Okay. And finally, Carolyn, what is your one bit of advice?
Yeah, I definitely want to piggyback on what John and Fred have said. I think that's all important. I would say, from my perspective, having clear specifications around timing and how you respond to defects, or even just how they mitigate odor control. I think those are very important to have. Tied to that is also material selection, thinking about what materials will work in certain scenarios. I think, you know, one size does not fit all, right? There are instances where certain resins work better in other areas. One example is high heat. You know, your CIPP is not necessarily going to last over time if it's constantly getting high heat introduced into the system. So really, you know, take the time to look at what materials are out there and what is going to best meet the needs of that particular system.
Great. Thanks for the response. And thank you to Carolyn, Fred, and John for your insight today. I'd also like to thank all the attendees for joining us. We had many great questions come in, so thanks for contributing to the conversation. Those that weren't asked during the webcast, we'll try to get these addressed offline via email. Also, I encourage everybody to be on the lookout for information on our future live webcasts. In the summer, we have one planned to focus on new installation. In September, we have finding success with Trenchless Technologies. And in December, we're planning to tackle infrastructure funding with a focus on the American Rescue Plan and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This concludes today's Trenchless Technology webcast. If there's anything you missed or would like to reference, today's webinar will be archived at trenchlesstechnology.com/webinars. As a reminder, any views or opinions presented in today's webcast are solely those of the presenters and do not necessarily represent those of Benjamin Media, Inc., nor does Benjamin Media, Inc. endorse any products or methods discussed. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay positive, and enjoy the rest of your week, everyone. Have a good day.